Capitol Hill faces increasing pressure as the DHS shutdown now entering its fifth week, leaving TSA workers and other federal employees unpaid. Lawmakers remain divided over funding, election security, and a potential new DHS secretary. NTD Chris Bob reports.
Why don't you tell your Democrats to vote to pay these poor
Let's do it. Let's do it.
No,
Why don't
you do it. I voted for it time and time
It's a
again.
bipartisan bill to fund just the TSA. Can we do that together?
Not acceptable. How about all the terrorist attacks like we see down on 6th Street? You want those to continue? These people are keeping us safe. Tell the Democrats to vote for funding the DHS.
A heated exchange outside an Austin airport Monday. Video posted online shows Texas Senator John Cornyn and Democratic Congressman Greg Casar capturing the frustration on Capitol Hill as the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security stretches past 30 days. Tens of thousands of federal employees, including officers of the Transportation Security Administration, are continuing to work without pay, while airport security lines grow longer across the country. Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma is set for a confirmation hearing Wednesday to become the next DHS secretary. Lawmakers remain divided over funding for the department, while Democrats are pushing a bill that would fund DHS without funding the administration's immigration enforcement efforts. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said Democrats will launch a discharge position this week to force a vote on funding agencies including the TSA, FEMA, the Coast Guard, and CISA. Senator Rick Scott posting on X, quote, "The Senate's job this week is to pass the Save America Act and fund DHS. Secure our homeland, secure our elections." House Speaker Mike Johnson writes, quote, "Agents are forced to work without pay, struggling to support their families, and so far 300 have quit. TSA agents are hurting, airport resources are strained, and our national security is being put at risk." Meanwhile, pressure is building outside Washington. In an open letter sent Sunday, Airlines for America, representing major U.S. carriers including Delta, American, United, Southwest, urged Congress to fund the Department of Homeland Security and guarantee pay for federal aviation workers during shutdowns. The airline group warned that airport wait times have already stretched to 4 hours in some locations and cited polling showing overwhelming public support for paying aviation workers during shutdowns. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Chris Bob, NTD News.
And TSA agents have officially missed their first full paycheck. Joining us now to discuss the shutdown of the DHS is Mike Leon, host of the Can We Please Talk podcast and director of strategy for the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. And we have Tony Kinnett, national correspondent for the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. First of all, good afternoon to you both. Always great to see you. Tony, I'll start with you today. So here's what President Trump said about the shutdown yesterday.
The Democrats aren't paying. The Democrats, we have a deal. They just said we're not going to pay. We're not going to do anything, and it's terrible. The Democrats are terrible. You know, it'd be nice to get along, but for years this has been going on, not just with me. For years it's been going on. Different ideology, but also different tactics. It's crazy. The Democrats don't want to pay. These are bad people. These are not people that love our country.
Okay, Tony, your reaction.
Well, I mean, the man's got a pretty decent point here. I mean, and when you see 4 Islamic terror attacks in the last 3 weeks, you see even Elisa Slotkin from Michigan making it perfectly clear. It's time to fund the Department of Homeland Security. It's not time to do little piecemeals and carving it up like a turkey, because this one little group that's, again, already funded through 2027 to 2029 based on the funding model, they don't like that ICE is enforcing the law. They said, we don't want Kristi Noem. Okay, Kristi Noem is gone. We want body cameras. Okay, you can have body cameras. Okay, well, we want no administrative warrants. Sorry, the Supreme Court of the United States has already upheld administrative warrants alongside judicial warrants. So there's no reason for this holdup other than that they're grumpy. And their grumpiness is costing Americans their safety. It's costing, of course, those serving in, for example, the TSA, their pay. And it's also reducing their effectiveness to operate at capacity. And this is going to cause Americans a lot of heartburn, as we're already seeing some of the polls bear out. So again, when the president makes that claim about Democrats, it's pretty easy to see where he's coming from.
Okay, Mike, please respond.
Yeah, thanks, Don. I mean, that's one way to look at it. This is what I was thinking about earlier today. First off, good to see you guys as always. You know, if I was
also.
constructing as a defense counsel, let's say, for example, and I was constructing an argument, I would say Tony's going to come on here and give you the conservative opinion, right? He's going to repeat something that Donald Trump said about the Democrats are radical and they're causing this government shutdown. And you think I'm going to give the Democratic position, but I'm not a Democrat, not a registered Democrat. I'm not a liberal. So those of you in the comments on NTD's web pages, I'm not a liberal. What I am going to give you is numbers. I'm going to give you data of TSA agents in the last time this happened, over 1,100 or so that didn't return to work. So we're going to have true impacts to this when this does happen. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, the Republicans control the House, the Republicans control the Senate, they control the executive branch at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and they control the judicial branch. And unfortunately, right now, we have had 2 American citizens that have lost their lives because of what happened with immigrations and customs enforcement. Tony is semi-right about the judicial and administrative warrant part. The point is the enforcement of administrative warrants, they are not the same as judicial. And what we have seen, like I said, play out in Minneapolis and with respect to some other cities, what we saw in Nashville with this reporter from Univision over there, there are some things with immigrations and custom enforcement that need to be reformed. Now, does that mean we need to hold the government hostage, especially TSA, during, you know, spring break weeks and peak travel seasons and kind of risk airport security? No, it doesn't. But that doesn't change the fact that Republicans do control the levers. And if they know that Democrats want this certain thing piecemealed out, and Democrats like Patty Murray from Washington have already outlined ways to fund the TSA, ways to fund other areas of DHS, especially FEMA and things like that as we head into hurricane season, those things should be already looked at, should be talked about on the Senate floor, and there should be some type of compromise. To blame Democrats only for this mess is what's wrong with this country right now. We shouldn't be blaming one party that is in the minority. We use the words majority and minority for a specific reason because it's based on numerical data. One party is in the majority, that is the Republican Party. They control the levers of government. So they are the ones that are supposed to lead from the front on this, because I was told throughout 2024 that the American people voted on this and wanted to change to a more conservative style of government. So if that's the case, it's time to get along, play ball with each other, because I'm flying on Monday to New York, Don, and I don't want to be impacted by all this.
You have skin in the game, Mike. Tony, let me get your response here. What's Republicans' responsibility here?
Well, I think that I really do agree with Mike on the both parties share responsibility for this. And if we're going to play a simple majority and minority style response here, fine. Filibuster be damned. Let's go ahead and cut it loose. Let's just go ahead and push everything through 51 to 49 and just go ahead and shove those things through. And if the Democrats want to win a majority, they can win a majority. Again, words like cloture are also rather important when we look at the rules set up in the Senate. But I think that if, again, as Democrats have promised to do in every single campaign, except for the now no longer in the, well, for some in the Democrat Party, if we're talking about Joe Manchin, but Kristen Sinema as well, no longer in the Senate, more moderate approaches from the left are not coming. Again, James Tallarico putting on a moderate face and bringing forward as radical a policy suggestion as he can possibly push out. If Republicans are going to fend that off, then all right, fine. Pass it with a 51 to 49 majority if that's the way forward. But again, I think that more importantly right now is getting the Department of Homeland Security open. This is a time when America is under national security threats. This is a time when, of course, the inconvenience of having to wait at the airport is frustrating. I understand that. That's not something to be taken lightly. But again, TSA, their primary responsibility is to ensure that travel safety, especially through airports, doesn't fall into horrible terror attacks. They're to keep us safe from those specifically. And they're not operating at their full capacity. And regarding the Patty Murray legislation, when you poison pill your own legislation, it often doesn't pass. Republicans are just as guilty of that as Democrats, but partisan theater is going to be partisan theater. It's as obnoxious as seeing 2 representatives or senators argue outside an Austin airport.
So, Mike, Republicans are in the majority, but it's a slim majority. Republicans don't have the votes.
Yeah, no, they don't. And by the way, to Tony's point, I am not big, I shouldn't say I'm not a big opponent of nuking the filibuster and having simple majorities. Because again, if you were duly elected to those numbers, you should be allowed to enforce the legislation that you want to, because elections should have consequences at the end of the day. So you're not going to see me if tomorrow John Thune changes course and says, you know what? I've got the votes. We're going to nuke this puppy. And now we're going to start passing legislation and get, the last few years of the Trump administration, things that are going to get passed through, depending upon obviously what happens in the midterms. And he decides to do it because that's the other part. That's the other part of the reason why he's not doing it, Don. He knows that in January of next year, this could all come back, a full circle. And now Chuck Schumer would be in the majority and not the minority, if we keep using those terms. So, but I'm not that big of an opposition person to that. I didn't like when Sinema and Manchin wanted to keep the whole, and I'm using like stuffy language right now, of like the back in the 1700s of when this all started. Like, if you got voted into the majority, that means that the majority of Americans, even if it's the simplest of majorities, 77 million to 75 million, you still won based on that total. So you should be able to get your legislation through. But to your point, Don, they don't have the numbers, which means that outside of that Austin airport exchange, what they should be doing is back in D.C. talking about, okay, meet me halfway on this, because we have, like I said last time, 1,100 or so TSA workers that didn't come back to those roles. That means you've got to backfill. Look, my brother-in-law is a TSA agent. He moved over to a different agency over the last year. So I know about this firsthand, because every time there's been a government shutdown, he's the first person I text. And so I know how this impacts them. And I know the rigorous work that they go through. I live right here by Miami Airport. Like I said, I am flying Monday, an early flight, and forget about the travel impact that it has. To Tony's point, it's the security impact that it has. And we've already seen threats different places in this country, whether it be a synagogue in Michigan or a church, whatever it was. Like, there's other threats that have happened, Mamdani and the attack that happened in New York City. This country right now is on high alert in a lot of different areas. And the last thing we want to be without is resources to one of the agencies that's meant to protect us in the air.
Tony, where do you see Democrats and Republicans meeting halfway? What is the path that you see to overcome this deadlock?
Well, I think that you're going to see more individuals like Elisa Slotkin that cave, because again, to the point, Republicans don't have the numbers to beat cloture. So therefore, it is Democrats who are saying we are not going to fund the DHS. And then they have a list of reasons that they're playing hardball on. And those list of reasons better be good enough for the American people to agree with you. According to the polling data, it's not. Currently, what you see in the general congressional ballot are numbers starting to drift away from the Democrats' exciting lead in the beginning of the year. That's getting closer and closer. Now, I actually think this is going to play out as the most unenthusiastic midterm of all time, because guess what? Congress sucks. But in that particular frame, the Elisa Slotkins who want to portray themselves as moderates, well, you don't get to say you're a moderate and then again amid a record number of Islamic terror attacks in 2 weeks, when the mayor of New York City is just encouraging all of the Islamic terror that he can, and then the rest of that radical wing whitewashing the terror, saying that you stand alongside these people in keeping the DHS shut down. That's not going to play. And that's not only just going to not play well in North Carolina and in Michigan, that's going to really start to eat into some of their more contested races in what are supposed to be lean blue districts. So they're going to have to make the decision. Is the reasons good enough? Is it strong enough to keep DHS closed? I doubt it. I think Fetterman and Slotkin are going to convince more to probably join them in flaking.
So, Mike, can I get your reaction to this? Senator Eric Schmidt said that Democrats are more focused on defunding ICE than keeping the American people safe.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Let me see. How do I handle this? I'll give you a specific race just because I happen to know one of the persons running in it. So Representative Seth Moulton, who I've mentioned on this show, who's a friend of mine, he's challenging Ed Markey, right? Ed Markey is about not defunding ICE. We need ICE in some form or existence. Whereas Seth Moulton is all about abolishing ICE, right? So you do have right now a wing of the party that wants to abolish it and remove it operations-wise. I think I mentioned this recently because we had Senator Ruben Gallego on from a border state who's like, ICE as constituted should be reformed. He's like, it doesn't make any sense to say the words abolish ICE because we need somebody that's actually enforcing immigration laws. Like this is not a Republican or Democrat thing. This is like we need these people. It's kind of like if you fire somebody in programming and then you fire the whole department, then you realize, wait a minute, who's going to schedule all this stuff? We need somebody here in programming. So whether you call it programming or you call it something else, you still need somebody in the department physically. So should Democrats be saying that or stuff like that with respect to, I mean, if we're going to talk about the midterms and the broader outlook, probably not. But I think there are bigger issues right now because the candidate who is now president at 1600 Penn ran on no new wars and I'm going to bring prices down. Prices are higher, gas is high, and we're at a war. So like those are things. Tony said it's going to be uneventful. I wouldn't say all that, Tony. I think this is going to be one of the most watched events with respect to the midterm if we keep going in this trajectory because, like I said, we've had higher prices and we're currently at war. We don't seem to have an end in sight unless we do something similar like we did in Venezuela, where we just say, oh, well, we took out the leader and now we're just going to leave it there. It creates a vacuum. It creates a trickle-back effect. And then all of that plus rising prices at the pump, things like that, that's going to come home to roost for one political party in this country. So I don't think it's going to be as uneventful as maybe Tony. Maybe that's not what he meant. Maybe he meant something else, Tony. I'll let you clarify. But I think that Democrats abolishing ICE is probably a little bit further down the totem pole than it was 2 months ago, 3 months ago when Tony and I were talking because of what's happened in the Middle East.
Okay, Tony, would you like to clarify?
Yeah, sure. So when I say that the Democrats bring the circus and Republicans bring excuses, people aren't going to come out to vote for that. The rebuke that is expected is not bearing out in the polls. And I think that maybe you'll see a slightly more excited primary. Maybe the data is not necessarily showing it so far. But when you actually get into the general election, I'm not seeing the masses come out in favor of re-electing or electing new Democrats who, again, are not proposing anything to cut costs. They're not proposing anything, nothing at all, no plan put in place. Republicans aren't doing that either. They're just saying, just trust the plan. So at the end of Q2, I think we'll get a clearer picture. But if not, then you're just going to see, again, excuses versus the circus. And as we've seen in every Arizona election, that doesn't really play well for turnout.
Okay, Mike, let me give Tony one more comment here because I want him to respond to something. Tony, so there was a proposal yesterday. Democrats proposed a partial DHS funding bill to reopen the TSA, FEMA, and the Coast Guard. Why didn't Republicans vote for that?
So from my understanding, and there's been about 5 of these particular bills, some on the House side, some on the Senate side, a few of these did have poison pills in them. So this is a constant stream of expectations when it comes to the House or the Senate, in which you say this is the Save All Puppies Act, and then about 3 paragraphs down, then we're going to kill all the kittens. This was not just a clean, only funding these particular measures style bills. There were other things in them. I don't have that list in front of me. I can gladly bring that up for our conversation next week. But a series of poison pills is what kills these particular things before. You heard Cornyn alluding to that when he was questioned by Cesar in that video at Austin Airport. Again, I don't have that list of poison pills because there's been 5 of these bills, some on the House side, some on the Senate side, and they all contained different poison pills. None of them were just clean, here you go, presto, it's funded.
Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Tony's right. And this is part of the reason why people hate politics, because what happens is from a messaging standpoint, the Democrats will run and say, there you go, Republicans, we had 5 different times to pass this and it was clean. And to Tony's point, it wasn't clean. What does clean actually mean? And now you can easily go out there and campaign and say, look, we're trying to fund the government. We don't want this shutdown. And this is how we introduced it. Like I mentioned about Patty Murray. And then you have the same thing with Donald Trump saying that Democrats are obstructionists and they're taking the whole thing down with them, which, like I said before, they're the minority party. So how can they do that? So there's a perfect example. I don't have anything to retort or add to Tony's thing. He's right about that. There were some things about it that were poison pills for sure.
Yeah, Tony.
And for the Republicans, Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri is attempting to do a poison pill thing on behalf of Republicans that Democrats are going to reject. So it goes both ways all time.
Okay, Tony, how do you feel about some of the Democrat demands like identification? You mentioned no masks, judicial warrants, but what about operations? No operations at schools and churches?
So as far as operations at schools and churches, I want to see what the reason and the rationale behind these things are. Judicial and administrative warrants, if the individuals, again, are being arrested, which commit extremely violent crimes, if you can run into a school and trespass, which is we've seen in 2 cases, one in Wisconsin and one in Illinois, well, that's a serious security issue. And state law in Illinois technically forbade that, but then federal precedent carried over due to kind of the imminent threat law that it cuts into. When you start issuing those kind of restrictions, law's not written like clean blocks. It's written like spaghetti. One noodle weaves in and out of all other different kinds of things. It'd be very hard to push that into an effective policy, no matter what law enforcement agency or group of people you're talking about, especially given that in immigration, we didn't even have immigration originally set up for a court system. You were shown here to be illegally, and then you were shown the door. So to kind of set that up at this way, it would take an entire college full of legislative writers to finagle something around in that way. As far as the mask and identification thing, there was an argument that, yes, law enforcement needs to be identifiable and they need to be clearly marked, but also given the 8,000% increase in violent attacks, given the doxings that do result in political assassinations and attempted assassinations, the ICE facility, of course, in Texas, the 8 terrorists who were just convicted, that's also a significant concern. And when we see people's families that are come after, because there might have someone or their church come after because they say, oh, this pastor's an ICE guy, we're going to storm the building. You're not really making a good case as to why those that are enforcing federal law enforcement need to show their face, identity, and home address to everyone walking by.
So, Mike, I asked Tony this, but I don't think I asked you. But what do you think is the path to reopening the government or the partial shutdown, lifting the partial shutdown, opening the DHS, the path for Democrats and Republicans?
Well, I think it's a little bit of what Tony and I have been mentioning in this segment, but I also think it's, Don, how do I put this? Common sense. So common sense lives in the fact that, to Tony and I's both points, right? We need these agencies. We need these agents to be able to do their job. We're going to be coming into a peak travel season with respect to TSA. Airports and airport security should be a top priority. You see FEMA here in the B-roll that's playing. Obviously, when disaster strikes, this is the agency that's in charge of helping these things. So how do we keep those properties funded while also talking about the certain things that immigration's custom enforcement should be doing that are akin to what local, state, or even other federal police forces that we have, FBI agents as an example, even though they don't carry body cameras and things like that, depending upon situation. How do we mirror those things and either table those things so that way we can extend this out, 45 days, 60 days, whatever it is from the resolution standpoint, to be able to make sure that even though we're kicking the can down the road, there's a light at the end of the tunnel where the can's going to go through. And I don't think we have that in American politics, because what you just played at the beginning of this segment was from 1600 Penn saying that Democrats are everything to blame. What you've seen from Tony and I are, there are some ways that we can concede about certain things. And yes, Republicans do this. Oh, yes, by the way, Democrats do this. And it goes back to my whole, analogy about roughing the kicker and running into the kicker. So how do we get common people like Tony and I with R and supposed D's next to their name to come together to vote in that majority that you need to pass something? I don't know how that comes to fruition unless, to Tony's point, there are some more Dems that cave and say they make some backroom deals that we've gotten some assurances about ICE coming down the road, and we'll be able to tackle that once we get this prioritized in terms of funding the TSA and DHS overall. I don't know how we come to that common road, because Tony and I, throughout the duration of the two of us doing this segment, we keep coming here where there's continuing resolutions, there's the government being shut down to some measure because of some department and agency, and because there's no common road, or how do we have a win-win here so we can both go out to our constituents base and say, okay, we've got government funded, and now we've got those employees that are funded. Oh, by the way, in Democrats, we've got to compromise on ICE, and they're going to do X, Y, Z. We haven't had that in the duration and the long time that Tony and I have been doing this segment. So I don't know how it comes to a halt, Don.
Well, all right, let's leave it there for today. Very intelligent conversation. Thank you. Thank you both, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Great to see both of you.
See you guys.
Israel says it killed Iran's top security chief and a commander in an overnight airstrike.